Greetings to the brightest audience in the country. This is Real Science Radio. I'm Fred Williams.
And I'm Ryan Williams, creation speaker and software engineer.
So Ryan, welcome back to the studio. You're sitting in for Doug, who is on assignment. He had a busy week last week. We all did at the Hydroplate Conference. That was a virtual conference that was just fantastic. And if you missed it, you can go to hydroplate.org if you want to catch any of the presentations that were given. We're going to be uploading the videos there and also on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/@realscienceradio. And all those videos will be edited and it'll be great stuff. So looking forward to that. So Ryan, coincidentally, late last week, the latest Creation magazine arrived in the mail, and I thought this is perfect timing because I knew Doug wasn't going to be able to do the show this week, and hence why you were in the studio with the latest Creation magazine.
Oh, it's perfect. It's perfect. And it's always a blast to do the Creation magazine. So looking forward to getting into this one, especially because there's some really cool articles in here that caught my eye, literally, as a couple of them are about how just awesome the human eye is, and even some surprising admissions by evolutionists. So stay tuned.
All right. Well, yeah. So before we get started, there's actually a really cool news story that just broke this last week, and it caught my well-designed eye, Ryan.
Yeah, it was pretty cool, from September 18th. So really, really recent news. And it's basically about the relationship, the inverse relationship in cells between size and number. So for example, in the human body, smaller cells, there's more of them versus larger cells, there's less of them. And even more than that, their mass ends up pretty much equaling in that the total mass of all the small cells pretty much equal the total mass of all the large cells, because there's more of the small ones and less of the large ones, which is pretty remarkable given that how that could happen by chance would be crazy. That seems like a designed thing to me.
So this came from the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, or PNAS, and the article is titled, "A Catalog of Human Cells Reveals a Mathematical Pattern," that you just spelled out, Ryan, and it's this inverse relationship between cell size and number. And it's really interesting. This article mentions other patterns that are like this in nature.
Yeah, because it's not just in cells. They actually, in general animal life, in the ocean, they kind of mapped out the plankton and the size on a logarithmic scale. And essentially, as you get to the larger sized plankton, there ends up being less of them. Kind of as you go down in size, ends up being more, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and at the same time, the overall mass stays unchanged. So there's this inverse relationship. So Ryan, also the author of this PNAS article, his name's Ian Hatton, not Ian Hutton. He's an ecologist at McGill University in Montreal. He discovered in 2021 that the same pattern exists when you sort the biomass of ocean organisms generally on a logarithmic scale, and not just plankton. I mean, this goes from bacteria to whales. It's just unbelievable. I mean, you've got God's fingerprints all over nature.
Oh yeah, it's just so cool. And there's a lot of other things just like this. This isn't just the only one. And you can find those at rsr.org/math.
Yeah.
Just mathematical, what seem like coincidences. We know that they're not coincidences, that God has shown in nature, almost just to tell us hey guys, I'm here.
So Ryan, that's another great example of God's fingerprints all over nature. Again, you can go to rsr.org/math. And that was really a lot of fun doing that show with Bob. There's so many examples that you see in nature. One of the last things he did before Bob went to be with the Lord is this whole thing on the triality of light, not the duality of light, but the triality.
Yeah, you mentioned it to me before the show. One of the many geniuses on the Manhattan Project, which was Robert Oppenheimer's project to create the atomic bomb at the end of World War II.
Yeah, you saw that movie. If I remember.
Yeah, it was good. It was good. I really liked it, but I've always been interested in that time in the creation of the atomic bomb. I always thought it was
I know you
cool.
were, because I reviewed one of your papers in college. You had me
proofread
it, and it was about the atomic bombs.
Yeah, that was one of the rare papers there were a couple I liked, but I actually enjoyed writing that one, which was generally rare for me. But
so Feynman's one of those characters that worked for Oppenheimer.
Yeah, his name's Richard Feynman, and he's one of the guys on that project. I can't remember if he was in the movie or not.
He was.
But okay, so I guess you know the movie better than I do then. But Bob actually had a quote about him and wrote about him that I think would be kind of cool to read. So he basically asks, did Robert Feynman see God?
And this is again at rstar.org/math, this quote.
Mm-hmm. And he says, when accepting his Nobel Prize in Physics, Feynman said, the fact that electrodynamics can be written in so many ways was something I knew, but I had never understood. It always seems odd to me that the fundamental laws of physics, when discovered, can appear in so many different forms. An example of that is the Schrödinger equation and the Heisenberg formula of quantum mechanics. I don't know what that is. It remains a mystery. But it was something I learned from experience. There is always another way to say the same thing that doesn't look at all like the way you said it before. I don't know what the reason for this is. I think it's somehow a representation of the simplicity of nature. A thing like the inverse square law is just right to be represented by the solution of Poisson's equation, which, therefore, is a very different way to say the same thing that doesn't look at all like the way you said it before. I don't know what it means. And then that's where Feynman kind of ends, and Bob's talking again. He says, Feynman might have been observing yet another manifestation of the one-to-many solution, that is, the plurality in the Godhead, perhaps multiple persons in the triune God, each being transcendent, impress themselves in reality. Thus, the biblical truth applies, pun intended, even in physics, that a matter is established by 2 or 3 witnesses, essentially saying that there's multiple ways to get to one solution. There's the truth can be found in different ways. It doesn't have to always be one avenue to get there.
Exactly. And that's so cool that Bob pulls in this reference from the Bible about how a matter is established by 2 or 3 witnesses. And so, you pull in the Godhead, the triune God, and just the different ways in nature that no matter, they look at different things and they arrive at the same thing. Mm-hmm. Different ways of looking at something and you get the same place. And just the simplicity of math, it's really cool stuff. So again, go to rsr.org/math. You can listen to the show, or we put a lot of content on that page. It's really cool. So Ryan, on to Creation Magazine.
Yep.
Is there a particular article you wanted to start off with?
Just start with what we teased the audience on with the I, and it's with the title Evolutionist Admission, I close to perfect.
Yeah. So, Ryan, that's a really good one. For the longest time, Richard Dawkins has been claiming that the eye was wired backwards. It's not a good design. I mean, how bad is that to tell the ultimate engineer of the universe, who's just incredible, what he designs? Oh, that's a bad design.
Yeah.
And it's been
the way our eyes work. Imagine saying the way our eyes work is a bad design.
Yeah.
That's kind of remarkable. My eyes are terrible, but it's not God's fault. That's the fall of man that caused my eyes to be terrible. They're even in their horrid state, they're still designed really well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And we'll put a link to the Trocula Challenge. And if you're watching the video, if you're listening on radio, we provide images while we're going through the video, and you'll see a picture of the trochlea, which is super cool. You got 2 of these things on either side of your head that hold your eye into place. And there's this little tendon that goes through a slit. So how did that tendon make its way through the slit? I mean, that's part of the eye, but not the mechanics behind the optics and all the incredible things that go on.
Just the thing that holds the eye in place so it doesn't plop out of your head cartoon style.
Yeah. Yep. And, I was looking on creation.com. Jonathan Sarfati wrote an article some time ago about how optimized just the optical nerves are based on studies they found. And he pointed out that Richard Dawkins never, in his books, it was only, he pointed out that Richard Dawkins says, I wrote this book about evidence for evolution because I realized I hadn't had any evidence for evolution in my other books, like The Blind Watchmaker. So he must have been listening to Bob Enyart, because we'd mentioned about how all his books don't have any mention or evidence of evolution. They have this silly stuff in there about me thinks it's a weasel and, ways of, somehow information can evolve. So he ends up writing a book where he tries to provide evidence for evolution. Well, this is one of them, that the eye is wired backwards. So anyways, that's a backdrop to this latest science news on even more evidence how just incredibly well designed the eye is.
Yeah. And this one is evolutionist writing. So they're basically contradicting Dawkins themselves in their article because the authors go through and they kind of even go through some of these arguments that have been proposed in the past about the eye being a bad design. And they even go through, like creation.com has also gone through in various articles refuting each of these points. And then they eventually say, yeah, this thing's a good design. Let's not be weirdos here. This thing is really good. I don't think they actually said the word design, but that's what they meant.
Did they actually say, let's not be weirdos?
I don't think they said that. Who knows? Maybe they did.
So Ryan, just to your point, they actually went through the same process. It took them a long time to catch up to creation science. That seems to be the case a lot. So, years or decade later, they're now going through the arguments of how the eye was supposedly badly designed. And when they go through them, they say those arguments fail miserably.
Yeah.
So what a candid admission.
Yeah, and some actual words they use, and not calling themselves weirdos.
Yeah.
But some actual words they use in their articles, they say things like amazingly efficient and truly excels, and that it's not upside down unless perhaps we stand on our head.
Yeah. So again, they're refuting this nonsense by Dawkins, and it's amazing. You'll still hear this argument from evolutionists. So Ryan, these guys are not closet creationists, right?
No, no.
They're evolutionists.
Yeah, they've got some article at some point that talks about how the eye evolved from a single photoreceptor cell. So yeah, these guys aren't, our bastions over here.
You wonder if this guy's opinion might be changing, and he just kind of, who knows? Because he wrote an article in 1994.
Yeah,
that was a long time ago. It's more than a quarter century ago. About how it says he did a graphic showing how the vertebrate eye could evolve from a light sensitive spot in stages, and that is so silly. In Creation Magazine, they provide a link on their website, creation.com/i-critique, so you can go look at that. So the article concludes they would be far less happy with his conclusion in their latest co-authored paper. And quote, in terms of performance, vertebrate eyes come close to perfect. Now, they would be perfect if it wasn't for the fall, but they're close to perfect. So what a candid admission by evolutionists.
Yeah, pretty cool. They probably don't even know what they're saying either, unfortunately.
Yeah. At least at the very least, they're being intellectually honest with this report. So Ryan, the next article I figured we'd talk about has to do with the eye also. This is actually whale shark vision. The title of this focus article is Whale Shark Vision, More Complex Than Thought.
Yeah.
More complex than thought for evolutionists. I mean, it's not more complex than we would have thought.
Not all that surprising for us, but it's kind of nice to be on the not surprised end of things.
Yeah.
Find out stuff and you're like, oh, that's cool. Yeah. And versus the side of, oh, that's another disaster of many. But yeah, this one's pretty cool. So they did this technique called electroretinography at the University of Queensland, which basically measures kind of the electrical responses to different light wavelengths. And they found that the photoreceptor cells in these whale sharks' eyes, they ended up being very good at detecting like blue-green light, essentially, which for them and their ecosystem really helped them to be able to see the bioluminescent creatures a lot more, which those also happen to be their prey. So it works out well. And sometimes this bioluminescent stuff can look really cool. I just saw this video last night before I went to bed because I decided not to go to bed right away because I'm dumb. And it was these dolphins swimming and they were like basically glowing with bioluminescence. So it was pretty cool. Wow. So it turns out these whale sharks can see this too. And it helps them to be able to have, better sight on their prey. So
Ryan, the bioluminescence, it's really cool. I mean, it reminds me of Apollo 13. Lovell, the astronaut Lovell, he told the story about how when he was a fighter pilot, I think his engines went out, or maybe not his engines, but I think his power in his plane, he couldn't see anything. He has to find his aircraft carrier. And it's like, that seems like a pretty desperate situation to me. That guy seems pretty calm, but he ended up seeing behind the ship, the bioluminescence of bacteria in the wake of the ship. And that took him right into the aircraft carrier. So there's many more examples in nature. It's a really cool phenomenon. And right below this article, I wanted to get into this thing on schools, gender, indoctrination in the United Kingdom. London think tank Civitas reported on a survey of 1,000 16 to 18-year-olds and parents of 12 to 16-year-olds. About 10% of the teenagers wanted to or had changed their gender. Unbelievable.
Sorry to cut you off, but that's a staggering number.
It really is. It's so bad. And again,
that's 1 out of 10 kids.
Yeah. It's all an attack on Genesis. The biggest, I think the number one thing with our show, Real Science Radio, is defending Genesis. I mean, a lot of times it just comes down to that, the age of the earth and things like this, questioning, Adam and Eve and trying to make it whoever you want, Adam and Steve or whatever.
Or Z and Zem.
Yeah. Oh, man. Yeah, they, them, this, that, and the other thing. So 67% were taught at school that biological sex is, quote, assigned at birth, suggesting some sort of arbitrary social convention, whereas, of course, it is based on observed anatomical reflecting genetic reality.
Yeah.
So no doubt due to that sort of teaching, 77% of the parents surveyed wanted unrestricted legal right to see all materials and lesson plans. Surprisingly, though, 1 in 7, 14%, not only didn't care, but actually opposed the idea of parents having that right.
Yeah, and that's
not surprising to me, actually.
It's not surprising, but it's just bad. Like, it's
good
news that at least, over 3/4 of parents think it's think it's horrible and okay, we need to see exactly what you're teaching our kids. But at the same time, you got 14% of people who not just think it's good, but say that, no, the parents have no right to know what their kids are being taught. Like, that's crazy. Yeah. And as, dishonest as they are, if public schools were teaching about God and teaching the Bible, then they would immediately be wanting to see everything. They're like, whoa, you can't teach our kids that. We need to see exactly what you're doing.
Yeah,
so
they live in a constant state of hypocrisy is what happens. So the article wraps up with this. Christian MP, which is Member of Parliament, Miriam Cates said this: no child is or can be born in the wrong body. So when 1 in 10 teenagers says that they have or want to change gender, we know that something is going very wrong. So people have forgotten their creator who created people male and female at the beginning. Again, Genesis chapter 1, verse 27.
And it's part of what it's, part of what's really a shame about it is she hits right in the head is something's going very wrong. And instead of helping these kids and helping them, get to the root of their actual problems and figure out what's going wrong. And, the biggest solution to any problem we can have is the saving grace of Jesus Christ. But instead of helping them deal with their problem, we end up giving them a fake thing that doesn't it only makes their lives worse. It's like, it's like telling a schizophrenic person that the voices they're hearing are really real. You got to listen to them.
Yeah.
Oh, this guy's telling you to do this. You got to listen to him. It's like, no, that's horrible.
You just enable them. So Ryan, I think down the road, we should do a show on Genesis, just the importance of Genesis, since we mentioned how there's this really satanic attack, spiritual warfare, and so much of it is directed on the book of Genesis. Because if you put doubts in people's minds about the very first book of any book, of the very first chapter of any book, why read the rest of the book? It's a very effective strategy, and that's part of what's going on here. So anyway,
and it's not just important because it's like the first book. All the foundations that it lays for everything else is so important. That's why the devil attacks Genesis, because he's smart, because he knows that all those, if people don't believe in these foundational ideas, like literally being born guys and girls, if Genesis is what lays that out, and that's where we know that truth comes from. If you get rid of that, there's a lot of things that now have no foundation anymore if people stop believing in Genesis.
Yeah. And if sin, how did sin come into the world?
Yeah.
Death, if there was millions and millions of years of death, disease, and suffering, which is what evolution in millions of years says, right? You've got millions and millions of years of death, disease, and suffering, yet the Bible says death is the result of sin. Death came into the world because of sin, and death is the enemy, the last enemy that will be destroyed. Death is a temporary part of history in our worldview. It came in because of sin, and then Jesus Christ is going to get rid of it at the end. And again, the last enemy to be destroyed is death. But if you believe in millions of years in evolution, then you believe in just nonstop death, disease, suffering through all of time.
And even if, for those out there who may be Christians who believe in millions of years, you can think of it this way, that millions of years of evolution to then reach a theoretical Adam and Eve of sorts, that's a lot of death and destruction and pain and suffering before, men sinned and sin came into the world. So that's something to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, there's the verse, death came by the sin of one man, and we'll provide a verse for that. So Ryan, before we run out of time, I wanted to talk about the cover of this magazine, and it's on spiders. Now, I don't like spiders.
Me neither.
You know how I am. I mean, your mom has to kill the spiders in her house. I'm sorry, I'm a wimp when it comes to that. Those things always seem to get away. I'm like, oh, and they just scurry off.
Well, the thing is, for them to get away means there has to be an attempt made to kill them at first. So
I've made some attempts, but we leave it up to your mom to take care of those little critters. But I thought it was a pretty good article. It's a summary of a lot of different spiders and their incredible design. Like, for example, and again, this is the Creation Magazine, volume 45, number 4. One of the things that stood out right away when you start reading about the silk that the webs that it creates and just the power of the silk. It's twice as elastic as nylon, and its tensile strength, which reflects how much stretching force it can withstand without breaking, in some cases exceeds that of steel.
Yeah, that's
it's just these little tiny,
crazy.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And then how intricate the webs are that they weave too. It's incredible. It's like Spider-Man style. The article even brings up Spider-Man, and where I may disagree is it says that spiders are cooler than Spider-Man, which, I don't know if we need to go that far. But, and the webs that they weave are pretty incredible. And it'd be like Spider-Man if he weaved his webs behind him instead of going forward, because that's basically what the spiders do. They're going somewhere and they're facing one way, and then they're weaving the webs behind them in really impressive patterns.
Yep. And, one that caught my eye, and again, this article, it goes through a whole bunch of different kinds of spiders and some of the really cool designs. One that I wanted to mention, let me find it here, is spider navigation. So the males of the desert spider, and I'm not going to say it, I'll put it on the screen. Sorry, people. I'm not going to pronounce that word. I'll try just for the fun of it. Lacorchistris aranicola. So they go on a long nighttime travels looking for females. Their outbound trip meanders considerably, yet they return to their burrow by a straight path. And so, quote, we can only marvel. This is a quote from a scientist, from an evolutionist. We can only marvel how some males can make an 800 meter or 2,500 feet round trip and still find their home burrow in the dark. That's amazing.
A lot of people make nighttime travels for females and, can't find their way home.
Well, yeah. You probably know the story of when I went up to Greeley, and this is before I met your mom, of course, when I went on a date with this girl in Greeley, and I couldn't find my way home. I was driving down the wrong way of a one-way street, and this cop pulls me over. I see these lights flashing, and it's a cop, and I'm like, thank goodness. And he comes over, I'm so happy to see you. You don't know how glad I'm. Write me a ticket, do whatever you need me to do, but get me out of this town. And he was really helpful. He's like, okay, yeah, this happens a lot in our town. And Ryan, back then, when we were having to trudge through big, blizzards of snow and to get to work and all that. Well, we didn't have GPS. We didn't have phones to say, hey, take me home. We might have had a map. I didn't have a map.
Dorky maps are huge.
Yeah, I had directions. I knew how to get to where I was going because I had directions, but I didn't, think to get directions to go home. So anyways, he guided me home. I guess the moral of that story is these spiders do a lot better job. They spend a long time looking for females, and then when they do and they're done, they have a straight path back to their burrow. It kind of occurred to me, your mom was actually going to school in Greeley at that time, I think. So not only did I fail finding the right, I didn't find the right female. I did later. So spiders do a better job than I do, apparently.
There's actually one cool spider that the article doesn't talk about that you had found and told me about earlier is a spider.
The recent news story.
Yeah. It's a spider that that makes its prey walk the plank. They call it the pirate spider.
Yeah. So this is called, and this is from Science News, and this was from last week, Ryan, September 18th. And the title of the article is "Some Cannibal Pirate Spiders Trick Their Cousins into Walking the Plank." And this is a Costa Rican spider, arachnid. And oh man, do you remember some of the ones we saw there when we were on vacation? Holy cow.
Those things are disturbing.
I will not live in Costa Rica, and I won't live in Australia. Sorry, people. Man, these things are, that thing was gnarly.
Yeah.
Anyways, this Costa Rican pirate spider, he lives up to his name, according to the article, and it tricks closely related orb weaver spiders into walking the plank right to their doom. So the world's many pirate spiders exploit a very particular food source, other spiders. But while most pirate spiders invade the webs of other arachnids, this particular pirate spider dupes potential prey into building a web right into a trap. Wow.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. And where does the intelligence and design and information come to allow that to, evolve by, mutations and natural selection? It's just, it's amazing how so many hoops and calisthenics you got to do with your mind just to try to explain this in an evolutionary worldview. It just doesn't work. But yeah, that was a cool story. It was kind of real timely for this Creation Magazine article on spiders. So I encourage people, if you don't get Creation Magazine, you should get it. It's a great subscription. You'll get, I believe it comes out 4 times a year. It's just a fantastic magazine. Yeah, so again, there's tons of different stories of spiders in here if you're interested in that kind of thing, and just on the amazing design of spiders. Ryan, there's also a part in here about, were there venomous spiders before the fall? So Creation Magazine provides their perspective on this. What do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting because, we just talked about the pirate spider making its buddies walk the plank into their own death. And there's another spider that, kind of as you alluded to, it pretends to be prey in a different spider's web and then kills it. It's, kind of brutal, I guess you could say. So
yeah.
Did that stuff exist before the fall? The Creation Magazine takes the angle of this stuff could have still existed before the fall, because their preferred idea is that the death that we kind of talked about that came as a result of the fall only applies to sentient creatures and creatures that can feel pain. Even so, like, reptiles and, mammals and stuff would probably fall into that because they can still feel pain and whatnot. Yeah. And, can have emotions.
The
yeah. Yeah. But, insects don't really have that. They're just...
Yeah, a lot of people don't know that. Like
they can't feel pain when you crush that thing. It doesn't get hurt.
Yeah, I used to get in arguments with my sister, your late aunt Cindy. She was real into spiders and insects. I'm like, it doesn't hurt them if I step on them, and we have scientific evidence of that. Like dragonflies, that you can trick them into eating themselves, and they don't feel pain, obviously, because they just keep doing it. It's interesting. This article did point out that there are some vegetarian spiders. But CMI doesn't take the position. They don't die on the hill that spiders weren't venomous or ate each other before the fall. They don't take that position. They kind of they're not going to die on the hill on that and say, hey, there's no way they do, because they don't have the nephesh, the breath of life. So they don't necessarily have to fall in that category. I have a feeling before the fall that they didn't. They were just probably all vegetarian spiders.
That would be my guess too, but it'd probably be a hill I wouldn't die on either per se. But it's an interesting conversation to have, because we've talked about this before, I think for Creation Magazine shows about other animals like dinosaurs. And there actually is one in here that we won't get to. So that's why the audience needs to get the Creation Magazine, because there's a lot of good stuff we don't have time
There's
to
always
read.
tons of stuff that you can't get to.
Yeah, but there's this one dinosaur that has this like claw, and they initially thought it was for killing prey.
It's like scissors, scissor hands.
And then they realized, they thought they realized it was for grabbing vegetation from trees, and now they realize it's not even for that. So the point of the article was to say that we sometimes don't know what stuff's for, but a lot of dinosaurs, as we've talked about before, and other creatures of prey, they were vegetarians before the fall, 100%. We don't talk about it with insects as much, and things like spiders, arachnids that So it's an interesting thing to think about at the very least.
Yep. One last thing I'll mention in this Creation magazine that I don't completely agree with, and I can guarantee ICR doesn't agree with, but it's a nice, healthy debate. And it's this thing about island snakes and how it talks about a bigger headed snake is better, gives it a better advantage. And it was the result of natural selection over time. And basically ICR has this thing, continuous environmental tracking, which is an affront to natural selection. I side with ICR. I believe natural selection has been oversold as a mechanism to explain things in life. Now, CMI doesn't take the position that natural selection works over, millions of years. It works. They're claiming it can work over.
Kind of like a reductive force.
Yeah.
It kills off things and then.
Yeah. And maybe you have a lizard on an island that is better suited to have bigger pads on its feet. And so those that don't have it will die off. Mm-hmm. And the blind cavefish thing, that's where ICR really focused their attention at the latest ICC conference this last summer. So there is this debate among creationists. I side with ICR because to me, it's more of an engineering perspective on how animals change and adapt using cues from the environment. And I think natural selection, mathematically, it would be too hard for that to happen in the number of generations we're talking about. It'd make a lot more sense if it was something engineered. And so you don't have to have entire populations die out that don't have a certain trait and then have the other ones take over. It's possible there's a mix of the two, but I think what would be predominant is CET, or continuous environmental tracking. We'll plan on doing a show on that at some point. Hopefully maybe get one of the ICR scientists in here for an interview. So Ryan, we are out of time. I'd like to, at some point, we should do a show on the importance of Genesis.
Yeah,
it'd be great
really
to have
cool
you
to
in
do.
on that, because I gave a talk at your school on creation science, and I think it'd be good to go through that. We'll plan a show. I know we've talked about it before. We teased that potential show down the road. So let's make sure we do that, hopefully in the next couple months. It was great going through the latest Creation magazine. Again, you can go to creation.com and subscribe to it. Highly recommend it. It's our favorite magazine. Now, Answers in Genesis has one that I'd recommend too, but between the two, I prefer creation.com, their magazine. The illustrations are great, the way they lay it out, and just the focus section has really precise articles that you can read. If you don't want to get in anything super detailed, you can just get really highlights of different things.
A lot of times those are the ones we normally go through, and they're the latest news and stuff too.
Exactly.
So it's kind of current events of creation science essentially too.
Yep. All right. Please consider sponsoring the show for Real Science Radio. Go to rsr.org and click on the store, or sponsor a show. You can go to rsr.org/sponsor. Ryan, I don't think we have a big mega church behind us, so we need your support to keep on the air and to keep pushing out this truth out to the whole world. And so our goal is to bring about the fullness of the Gentiles. Once we get to that point, then Christ comes back.
Yeah, it's partially contingent on us too. He tells us he's not going to come back until everyone's had a chance to hear. So it's our job. If we want to hasten the coming of Christ, as all the apostles did, then we got to do our part.
That's one of our goals here at Real Science Radio. Oh, and one last thing, Ryan, I wanted to give a shout out to Chris Saddle. He's volunteered to edit the videos of the Hydroplate conference. Now, he's a producer and he's got editing skills, and this video editing is time consuming, and for him to step up and do this, it's just fantastic. So the videos that you'll be able to find at hydroplate.org on our conference that happened last week, they'll be professionally edited. We all presented our stuff with PowerPoints, or most of us did, and he's just gonna, I can't wait to see what he does. And again, those videos will be at hydroplate.org, and we're also going to upload them to Real Science Radio's YouTube channel. So stay tuned for those. It was a great conference. So for Ryan Williams, I'm Fred Williams of Real Science Radio. May God bless you.